Hello everybody, and welcome to the third in this year's series of webinars looking at teaching subjects through English, or CLIL, Content and Language Integrated Learning. This is the third, as I said, and today we're focusing on sports. So teaching sports and activity through English. I'm very lucky to be joined once again for her third appearance in our series by Sarah Hilliard. Um, and just to point out as well that for once we also have another name, which is the name of Aurélie Détry. Now, Aurélie worked very, very hard on this presentation, but unfortunately she's not very well, so she can't be here, and Sarah stepped in and finished things off. So thank you, Sarah, for saving us.
No trouble.
So as I don't think Sarah needs much introduction, but she's a teacher trainer, an author, a teacher, a school leader, all of the above, who's specialized in CLIL and delivers a whole range of teacher training courses in the UK and abroad. Aurélie Détry is a teacher trainer based in Spain, working for the British Council, and who's been delivering CLIL training for a number of years. And both of these experts were advised by another expert. That's Pauline Bourrois-Poignant from the Academy of Dijon. I hope Pauline is here. And we're very, very grateful to her for her input and her knowledge that she shared with us. So, as usual, I'm going to share with you a little information about the British Council, a little information about the webinar as well, and then from there, we'll move into Sarah's presentation. At the bottom of your screen, you have the option to activate the subtitles by clicking on the closed caption icon. You also have the option to ask us questions, and we're really keen that you do. So please use the Q&A function to ask us questions. If you are here at the end of the webinar, you have access to the feedback form, and through the feedback form to the certificate of attendance. You have the chat function to ask us to tell us things about yourself, answer Sarah's question, and so on. So please do interact with us. Now, just a quick reminder about the British Council's work. We're the International Organization for Cultural Relations and Educational Opportunities, building links between the UK, excuse me, the UK and countries around the world. In France, we support the teaching, learning, and assessment of English, and we do that in a number of ways through our research. Can we have the next slide, Sarah, please? Thank you. So here you can see our report into CLIL that we've just published. And this is just one example of a whole range of projects that we run around the world, developing a firm knowledge base in education. We also support exchange. So our Schools Connect platform enables us to, we're going backwards, I think, Sarah.
Oh, wait. Sorry
Thank you.
about that. There you are.
So our Schools Connect platform enables teachers across France to find partner schools in the UK and build projects between teachers and projects between learners. We also organize events that enable partners to share expertise about their education systems. Here is our recent workshop on CLIL, organized in partnership with France Éducation Internationale, in which we invited experts to talk about policy and practice and to bring teachers, policymakers, researchers together. You can see recordings, you can see lots of information in this link that I'll share in the chat. And from that link, you can also, in a few weeks, see the finalized report telling us all about the outcomes of this event. We also work in different schools around France and different academy around France, taking part in steering committees, visiting schools, talking to teachers, and offering advice on the teaching of English and the teaching of subjects through English. So today I had the pleasure of going to Chambourcy near Paris and visiting two wonderful schools there. Next, we offer resources, ready-made lesson plans, ready-made materials, cultural activities to help you as you deliver your classes. And finally, like this webinar series, we offer training. We offer training through our Teaching English platform, which has training courses of 6 to 9 hours on a range of different subjects, and webinars like this one, looking at specific elements of teaching of, in, and through English. So, without going on much more about that, it's a pleasure to move on to this webinar. So, today's webinar is looking at teaching sports through English. Sorry, I should say you can also sign up to our newsletter and keep in contact with us that way to learn more about not just this webinar, but all of our work. So I'm going to hand over now to Sarah. As I said, questions and answers in the Q&A box, subtitles in the CC box, and talking to us in the chat all the way through. Sarah, thank you very much, and over to you.
Amazing. Thank you very much, George. That was a great intro about what the British Council does. So I think that was all very, very nice and clear for everybody. And hello, everyone. It's lovely I was reading all your comments in the chat and where you're from. So I've got lots of people from France, of course, but also Spain and Portugal. So that was lovely to see, and from some other places as well. So it's lovely to have all of you here with us. And I'm very honoured to be delivering my second British Council webinar this year, and we're still in January. So, and this is my third in the CLIL series. You might remember me from 2 weeks ago giving the English, teaching maths through English webinar, if you were there. And if you were there, write a little me in the chat box if you were at the maths webinar 2 weeks ago. Or maybe you remember me from last year. Hey, there you go. Lots of you are back. That's really nice to know. Lots of you are back. And last year with the different languages of CLIL that you can watch on the British Council website. So you can have a look at all those recordings again if you want to, or anything that you've missed. Wow, lots of you are here again. So that's really nice to know. Fantastic. So hopefully you'll be as happy with the maths webinar as you are with the sports webinar today. And I was really excited about doing this webinar again because I know what an enthusiastic group of teachers you are, and how you like interacting, and you're very keen to answer questions and ask and share your thoughts and your ideas. So I was really looking forward to it because it's lovely to be giving a session in which the audience is so interactive, and you're not audience in the end, you are one of the big agents that makes a good webinar. So thank you for that. So what we're going to be doing today is, first of all, we're going to start with a little icebreaker, and then we're going to read you a few CLIL concepts very briefly, but then we'll look at examples of the 4 Cs specifically in sport or PE. And we'll also explore practical strategies like routines or using visual support, some games that you will hopefully find useful for your lessons. And I'll try to be providing some support with your planning of your lessons. But before we do anything else, I wanted to get started with a little warmer, a little icebreaker to get your fingers warmed up, although you have already warmed up your fingers a lot with all that chatting in the chat box. So as we go along, I will be asking you to use the chat a lot. So keep it open and keep your fingers ready. So in the same way as athletes and sports people have to warm up before their grand match, our brains need to warm up to be receptive and to participate in teacher development. And your students need to warm up in class, both for moving their bodies, but also for speaking English. So here's a little icebreaker. I play tennis. I take classes. I play with friends. or my husband, or I play with my brother, or I play with my children when I can. So if you could tell me in the chat what sports you play or what sports you teach. Wow, lots of different sports. Badminton, running, skiing, swimming, bikes. Oh, preschool PE. I love preschool. Run and bike and yoga, traditional sports, lots of yoga, horse riding, basketball, dance, yoga, lovely frisbee, horseback riding, climbing, volleyball. Wow, pickleball with your family, playground games, cooperative games, handball, fitness, teach all sports, fabulous, Zumba, running, dancing, cross training, swimming, lovely, handball, soccer, CrossFit. Wow. Okay, I can't read them all out. But wow, what a big variety in there. That's amazing. It's lovely. What's water walking? Um, dancing, hiking. I love it. Okay, lots and lots of different sports in there already. Um, a lot of variety. Um, in a classroom or in a sports field, wherever you teach, which it could be your teaching on and your learning space could be different. If you're teaching sports, it could be sports field, it could be inside a classroom. I might do a warm up like this, but maybe rather than asking like this, I might say, let's pass the invisible ball. And then I would say, I play tennis, pass the ball, and someone will catch the invisible ball and say, I play baseball, and pass it. And someone will catch it and say, I play rugby, and pass the invisible ball. Now, we could talk about very big balls, or we could pass a little tiny ball. So when we catch the ball, we have to catch the tiny ball, or we can catch the really big ball, or we can catch a rugby ball, which has got a different shape, or a tennis ball. So we have to make sure we're imagining that ball and what it looks like and what it feels like, and if it's a heavy ball, or maybe it's a very light ball. So a little bit of drama in there, and getting your students to use these sentence stems. I play, or I like, or I enjoy, and you can include that movement of the arm as well. So you're warming up both the body a little bit while connecting with the language. Um, and so we're going to look at a few key CLIL concepts now. So we know CLIL stands for, what does CLIL stand for? Who can help me? And what do you call it in France? Yes, we've got content, Patricia. Very good. Yes, and you would call it a meal, is it? Yeah, DNL, Natalie. Yes, excellent. So in English, we call this, Joanna, content and language integrated learning. Thank you for helping with that. Excellent. Content and language integrated learning is what you call a meal or DNL. And so basically, we're working with two elements together. The first is the content, which in this case is PE, and I think you call it EPS in French. It's EPS, correct? Um, Yes, excellent. And it includes, of course, sports skills, dribbling, jumping, balancing, throwing, but also warm-ups, health, safety, movement, cooperation, teamwork, rules, coordination. There's a lot of content involved, isn't there? Yes, education physique et sportif, or something like that. Um, and of course, there is the language. There's content and the language in this case is going to be English, but it's not going to be taught as a school subject, but instead used as a working language to teach and to participate, to use as you go along. So you're not teaching an English language class, but the language is being learned because it is the vehicle that you're using to teach sport or PE. So, very good French, says Betty. Thank you. You're very kind. You're a very kind person, Betty. In very simple terms, it means that learners learn subject content, here physical education, through a foreign language while being supported so they can succeed in both. the content and the language. And I think there is a great match between sport and learning a language. There's movement, there's demonstrations, it's very visual, there's repetition, there's doing. You support understanding very naturally when you're doing all of that. So, sport for me is a very natural subject for CLIL and for learning a language. It's active, it's routine based sometimes. It gives language a real purpose. It uses the whole body. And when children move, they don't just hear language, they feel the language in their bodies. They can see it, they can do it, they repeat it, they connect to it physically with physical action and real outcomes. So the word isn't just floating in the air like vocabulary on a worksheet. The word is attached to experience. Um, yes, Eleanor, for example, TPR, absolutely. Barbara, parts of the body, yes, very good. So think of words, please, if you could write in the chat box, words that you think you would learn through the body. What kind of words do you learn through the body? Action verbs, for example, Amaya. Yes. What is TPR? Total physical response. Total physical response usually uses commands. Okay, so things like touch your head, touch your shoulders, touch your knees, or move, run and touch the net, or run and touch the cone, or run to the baseball, um, or things like that. So using commands for students to use the understand the language and use their bodies and show understanding through action. That's TPR, okay? Yes, good. Slow, fast, stretch, action verbs, jump, jog, um, songs like Head and Shoulders, Knees and Toes, prepositions, directions, parts of the body. Yes, Simon says right, left, up, down. Loads and loads of words that are really useful and words that we normally teach in a primary class anyway, in a language primary class. And these are all going to come up naturally in what you do when you're using PE or sports. So it's very often these words that you're telling me about are linked to movement or to actions, because you're learning through the body. And those are the words that are best remembered, not by being explained sometimes, or not the words that are being read in a course book, but when they're experienced. And that's exactly what PE gives us, that language that is tied to physical experience. Okay. Jump is not an abstract verb. You actually do it. You feel the sensation in your legs. Slowly is a change of rhythm, and you can feel that change of rhythm. Freeze is a full body stop, and you feel that. So it's when the body is involved that memory is stronger. That's the great thing about it. So let's have a look at the 4Cs framework that we use in CLIL. Barbara says, I do a 10-minute warm-up routine every morning with my pupils before we start anything else. Most of them could repeat the exercise by heart by now, I guess. Yes, absolutely, Barbara. That's a lovely thing to do when you start for 5, 10 minutes doing a warm-up routine every morning. And then when it's a routine, it's routinized, it's repeated, and probably you are absolutely right. Your students could just do it themselves. Maybe you could invite one of them to come to the front and you could become one of the students and see if they can lead that routine. That would be great. Using a mini teacher is always quite good to see if they've incorporated it. Okay, so to help us think clearly about CLIL, we often use the 4Cs framework. And we've seen this in the math session as well, and the science session last week. If you were there, I was there. So the first C that we've got here is content. That's where we start when we think about CLIL. This is what students are learning in PE. So it's the PE content, the skills, the rules, safety, practicing the physical skills of the sports itself. We've got community, the language that they need to take part, to listen, to talk, to react. We've got cognition, the thinking that is involved, the decision making, for example. I always remember that very clearly from my tennis lessons and my tennis teacher saying to me, when the ball's coming, you need to make a faster decision. In fact, by the time the ball reaches you, it's already too late to decide. Decision making comes before the ball even reaches you. You don't wait for the ball. And so I had to do really, really fast decision making. That was a really good skill to learn while I was playing tennis. So there's a lot of cognition in sport, reading cues, making decisions, adapting, um, all under time pressure as well. So in PE, students are constantly thinking, even while they're moving fast. Um, and we've got culture or community, the wider world of sports, traditional games, cultural differences in sports, sports that were invented in different places, or variations that you can find in sports in different places. So what we're going to do today is we're going to go through these 4 C's from the framework more deeply, and we're going to look at some practical examples, okay? So that is going to be the plan for today. The 4 C's in a sports class. We started with content, okay? Content always comes first, and you are the experts in PE, okay? You know what learners need to learn in PE. You have got the professional knowledge. CLIL does not replace it, it just gives a language through which you're going to teach it. Okay. And so the content you, of course, know about it's sports, it's basketball, swimming, it's dance, how to improve the skill, chest passes, bounce passes, dribbling, but it also includes warming up and cooling down, and how important it is to look after the body, um, but also other learning points like life skills, social emotional skills, cooperation, managing emotions. There is a lot of emotional work when you're doing PE, respecting rules, teamwork, being a good team player, but also includes content from sciences like anatomy and physics. So your contents are very, very broad, aren't they? And so in CLIL, content comes first, language supports it. Okay, you know your content, and when your content is clear, it's pretty easy to decide what language learners will need. Okay, and so it's easy to think about your language objectives once you know your content objectives. If your content objective is students can dribble with control while moving for basketball, then the language will be things like dribble, control, slowly, eyes up, or feedback language like good control, try slower. That's all the language that you're going to be planning. Even that language that's going to come out quite naturally, like good control or try slower, encouragement kind of language. And we're going to be looking at that in a minute with communication. Content comes first, then comes language. We're going into communication now. Here we have 3 types of communication. We're going to start with language of learning. The language of learning is the language that is directly linked to the activity itself. So in PE, that often means the key vocabulary, the subject-specific language, maybe short instruction phrases as well. Does anyone know what an anchor chart is? Could anyone tell me what an anchor chart is? Does anyone use an anchor chart? Okay, we've got some no's. Okay, Barbara says it's like a mind map, a poster. Yeah, it's a kind of mind map poster, brainstorming. Okay, carte mentale. Okay, yes, perfect. Okay, so a very effective tool for key language is anchor charts. And you can go back to my webinar from last year on the languages of CLIL, and I do explain in more detail what an anchor chart is and how to use it. And you've got a follow-up activity for using anchor charts as well. So you can go back to that to find out more. But basically, um, yeah, Benedict says flower and petals with words. That's a really nice example. But Basically, an anchor chart serves as a visual support and shows those keywords or key phrases that you plan and that learners can look at during the lesson. So yes, someone said it's like a poster. Yes, it is. So it's a poster. Um, Sometimes you create it yourself, but more effectively, you will be doing it with your students. What kind of language should I have on this poster? See if they can help you create it. And as language comes up, you add to it. So it's kind of an interactive poster where it's changing. You're adding to it all the time with your students. So it might be a poster, it could be a whiteboard, but it would be good if it could stay there for the duration of that unit that you're working on or the sport that you're teaching until you pass on to something different. Where you have pictures, where you have words. Yes, Charlotte, you can create the chart with the children. That's the best way to do it. Some teachers do it without the children for the sake of maybe time management if they don't have too much time in class. But if you can make it with the students, that's even better. And you have pictures and you have words and you have arrows. So it is like a mind map or kind of like a brainstorm, yes. And it's a referent, as Margot says, that you have it on the wall. So when students are working or doing things, or if you're going to be outside in the sports field or in a field, you will probably need to take it with you, perhaps. So make sure it's something that you can have standing up. Some teachers use those what are they called? Those structures that artists use to put their artwork on, and you could have the language there as well in really big writing. So that helps as well. But of course, it's easier in the classroom, of course. But if you're in a field, you can also take it with your paperboard, Sabine. Yes, that's great. So the advantage is that students don't need to stop and ask you, or you don't have to interrupt them because they're using their L1, that's their first language, their mother tongue. And instead, they can refer directly to that. So it makes them more independent so that they know where they can go to for that help rather than having to interrupt the activity. Sometimes we call them word walls, or sometimes we call them SOS boards, like help board. So it's an SOS board, so they can look there for help and it supports that independence. Okay, so here we have an example of an anchor chart for baseball, and those are the types of words that are going to be really useful for this language of learning. That those key words. An easel, Sankari, an easel. Yes, that is what I was looking for. Thank you. The second type of language that we're going to be looking at for communication is language for learning. And this is the language that students need to interact with each other during the lesson, or with the teacher and the teacher with the learners. But it's not enough with single words now. So we don't communicate by saying ball. What about the ball? We say pass the ball, or we say leave the ball, please, or I like that ball, or where's the ball gone, or we need to buy a new ball. We have to say something about the ball. We can't communicate to people by just using individual words. So we need more than that anchor chart where we had those key words. So we need sentences. We need to transform those sentences into dialogues and interaction patterns because P is social. P is teamwork, it's turn taking. So students need a lot of language that allows them to interact. And so this interactional language is really important, especially in in a subject that includes so much social use and yeah, and so much interaction. So think about your PE lessons, please. And even if if your students come up with language in French, what is that language that they say all the time, that you hear them saying all the time, that language that they're using, whether it's in English or in French, because maybe they haven't learned it in English, but what is that language that you hear them say that they definitely need for sport? What kind of language do they use? It's my turn, Flora. Perfect. Yes. Pass, Rafaela. Yes. Um, that's I win. Yes. Valerie, referee, help, says Juliet. Yes. Okay. Can I try, Joanna? Yes. Okay. So there's certain language that you can predict that your students are going to need. So this is the language that you're going to be planning for as well. So you might hear things like, asking for clarification or turn taking. Not fair. Or again, move, says Dogan. Yeah. Speed up, Natalie. Yes, excellent. So a lot of the language that you're typing into the chat box is very interesting because it's functional language. It's language that students need to function in that activity that you're doing. They say it because they need it, and there's a lot of language that you can predict they're going to need. There's some language that you can't predict, but there's some that you can. Yeah. So I'm going to stop here for a minute to clarify something about instructions and explanations, because for instructions, especially, we often use very short language, simple, clear, repeatable, and that's our target. We want to do that. Yes, Valerie, throw the ball. Okay. We want to use that kind of language because that language can be repeated by the students. We don't want to make instructions and explanations too complex and using too much language. We want to make sure we're using specific, straightforward, simple language, chunks, phrases. So we need to plan for that. Because if you don't go with a plan in your mind, sometimes what happens is that when you're in the class, you start talking about what you want them to do, and you're not really exactly sure what language you're trying to use if you're thinking on the spot. So sometimes it's good to think of the script, that language that you're going to be using, if you can predict it. Okay, whether it's your language or the language that you're going to expect your students to be using. Okay. Um, but it doesn't mean that everything must be said in English all the time. It means English is planned where it makes sense and where it helps students, and where you think they're going to need it. Okay, but we don't ban the first language. We use it purposefully when it really helps learning. For example, some instructions might have to be given in L1 mother tongue, or certain explanations for certain terms that may be complex that you might want to explain, or maybe consider perhaps that it's important to explain safety rules very briefly in their first language to make sure that they understand these, because safety comes first. Yes, Sophie, safety rules, that's right. So there are certain things that you might want to decide. I'm going to be saying this in the first language, because we don't want to ban the first language if it's going to be useful, if it's purposefully used. But the rest of the language, if you can say it in a short phrase, nice, straightforward language, that's amazing. Isabel says, write the instructions before the lesson. And I think that is really useful to, when you're planning, visualize your lesson and think, what language would be really useful? How will my students understand what I'm trying to say? Can I say this in English, or do I need the first language to say this? If I can say it in English, what should it be that I'm saying? How can I make it understandable? What kind of language should I be using? Yeah. Um, Charlotte is asking, like, what can we do the closing session in L1? What do we? Okay, we're going to go into that in a bit. So, Charlotte, if you'll bear with me, we'll go into that in a bit. What happens at the end of the lesson? Yes. Okay. So language for learning, we had turn taking, we had asking for clarification, we have asking for something. You said this in the chat box, pass the ball is language that's obviously going to come up. Yeah. So we're going to make sure that we are teaching that, and we're making sure that that language is something that we're teaching and we're giving our students the opportunities to use. Yeah. Um, Helen says you practice it with your pupils, 3 to 6 year olds, and it works very well. Excellent. Yes, Helen, thank you. Yes. So and turn taking can be one of the biggest sources of conflict in PE, I think. So giving learners the English for it would be extremely useful and practical to reduce conflict and help activities run more smoothly. And so yes, we will have language like my turn, your turn, let's switch. And you can also introduce these 2 or 3 phrases in a chant form, with gestures and actions. So you could, for example, drill them quickly before you start an activity in which you think they will need it. So you could have pairs standing one in front of another, and they could say, my turn, your turn, switch. And they switch places. My turn, your turn, switch. And they switch places. my turn, your turn, switch. So you're having them kind of drill this language in a way that's like a chant, and they're doing the gestures and they're moving when you say switch. So it's a little chant to help them memorize those phrases. And then you go into the proper main activity where they will probably use that language. Okay, so you kind of pre-teach that language and you have them practice that language before. Um, you can also practice these kinds of interactions in ways like they're in role plays, or dividing the language in groups. You could, for example, show a ball and pretend to pass the ball, or it could be an invisible ball like the one at the beginning, and you could get them all to do it. Let's say it's an invisible ball. You could do a big pass or a small pass, or you could do a tiny pass. Or what about if we did a happy pass or a sad pass or an angry pass? So having them use drama with movement, including those words, um, pass the ball. You could have divide the students in two groups, and they could face each other in two groups. And group one says, pass the ball. And group two passes the ball in the way they want, as a happy ball or a sad ball, or with their nose or with their elbow, they could pass the ball. And they could say, here you are, when they pass the ball. And the group one receives the ball in the same way and says, thank you. And they pass it back in the same way. So you're doing a kind of role play. You're using drama, you're using an invisible ball, but you're using that language. So you could always do little exercises before you start the main game or the main activity, the main sport, so that they can incorporate this language. Okay, so that role play would be pass the ball, here you are, thank you, okay, but you're doing it in a way that is creative, and you could do that in the classroom before you go to the field if that is how you're set up, or you could do it in a circle in the field if you're in a field already. And I heard something very interesting about quite a new policy in France that requires 30 minutes of daily physical activity. Those 30 minutes of yeah, APQ. That's it. Thank you. APQ. So I think that these little games or these little exercises could be really good to include as those 30 minutes. Even if you do 30 minutes divided up, I think you're allowed to do that, right? Lots of 5 minute physical activity moments. So you could do TPR or commands or miming or little role plays like this with action. So of course there has to be some physical activity. Amaya, could someone say, oh yeah, Aurore is activities physiques quotidiennes. So it's 30 minutes that they have in France. It's a policy where the teacher has to include 30 minutes of daily physical activity, which is wonderful. Um, Even if it's scattered into little 5 minute moments, because we know that the brain can't take too much information in a certain given time. So the brain needs to stop and needs to use some physical activity. And it's a really healthy habit to teach, that we need to stop doing what we're doing and focusing for so long, and the brain needs to stop. So I think it's also great to, yes, the goal is to give students habits to move. That's right. And it's a really healthy habit, isn't it? And it's like a brain break, I think, as well, if you divide it up in your day. So I think it's wonderful. Um, and also within this language for learning, we have encouraging language and cheering. It's lovely language for children to encourage others, give a high five, or saying great effort to their teammates, or good try, and it encourages resilience. And having your students use that language is really nice again. So short and sweet phrases, they're high impact because they're easy, they're emotional language. It's full of energy, and learners tend to like saying it to others and cheering them on. Well done. Yes, amazing. Bravo. Go, Sarah, go. When they're running a race, for example. So this is really lovely language. Make sure that this is included as well, because it's nice to have this positive environment. Um, Yes, I understand it would be hard to achieve each day with the full schedule. Yes, I do understand that. A lot of brain breaks videos that you can do. Yes, Margot, excellent. Danny, go. Excellent. That's lovely. With shy students, it helps a lot, says Magali. Maybe they can speak without thinking they're afraid of it. Yes, yes, excellent. Thank you very much for that. And then the language of scores. So you've got authentic language that you use in PE. You can make it really simple, like 1 point, we're winning, the final score, very simple phrases to talk about or words to talk about, scores, a draw or a tie. And then you can also make it more specific to the sports that you're playing. So in football, we might say 3-0. In basketball, we might use big numbers like 116. In tennis, we say 15 love. And this is very specific to each of the sports, which is interesting as well to point out to your students. Um, Yes, Valerie. So they can cheer each other on like cheerleaders. Maybe a little chant could be nice to teach them. Yes, that gave me that idea. Thank you, Valerie. Um, Routines are one of the strongest supports for teaching language because they contain a lot of language that is repeated very often. The language is learnt very naturally over time. So you might start with your greeting. Hello, everyone. How are you today? Are you ready? You can always add choice. And this is usually done when students are coming into the classroom, the teacher stands at the doorway, and sometimes what you could do is have some pictures that represent different ways of greeting. So you have high fives with a picture and the word next to it, or handshake picture and the word handshake, or wave, and students can choose how they're going to greet you that day. Um, yes, Raphaelette, dance is great too, and it's got a lot to do with all those skills that you learn in sports. Moving from one place to another, sometimes it's useful to make it visual and assign names to spaces. So instead of giving long explanations about where you want your students to move, please everybody stand up now, go to the space where we play games over there, yes, but don't run, okay. Instead of saying all that, you just say, please walk to the red circle. And that's much easier to understand. It's visual, you're giving them that nice support, and you're assigning a color to the space or a shape to the space, and it's much easier. Waving is waving like this, high five or a handshake, for example. In the pandemic, it used to be a fist bump as well. Yeah. But you could keep the fist bump if you wanted to as well, of course. Um, what's hidden. So including these little game-like routines is good as well. So you can practice certain language. If you're going to be playing with a ball and with cones outside, maybe you want to put into a bag or a box a ball and a cone and have students come and touch and feel it, or put it in a feely bag that they can feel from the outside and try to guess what is inside. So you bring up these keywords that students will need. A basket, is it a basketball? Is it a cone? And these kinds of little routines that you can do, and they know this is going to happen before you go to play the game. So they have this little language. And at the end of the lesson, you're going to ask, I think it was Charlotte who was asking, you can ask, what did we do today? Did we play football? Did we play basketball? Did we play hockey? Did we use a ball? Did we use a cone? Did we use a net? And you can show them pictures, or you can show them the actual materials that you use so that you give them the visual support while you're saying those words. So these routines make English very predictable, and predictability supports your learners to learn the language. Um, Magali suggests jump to the red circle, run to the white triangle, walk to the. Yes, absolutely. Those very straightforward language with actions and with very specific support of what you're talking about, that place that you're talking about, the red circle. The exit ticket at the end, absolutely, and I'm coming to that in a minute. Okay, language through learning. So we've looked at language of learning. We've looked at that was the language that was directly linked to the activity itself. We looked at the language for learning, which was the language that students need to work together, ask, answer, cooperate, or manage the activity. And sometimes language appears during lessons simply because learners need it. So you've got planned language, but also you've got unplanned language or emergent language. It's the language that stems from the lessons. It's a more spontaneous use of the language. Um, for example, if a student wants to say, it's not fair, or I'm tired, or he cheated, or that's difficult, or I haven't got a ball, or it hurts, maybe you didn't plan that language. Maybe it's language that just came out, it's meaningful, and it just happened. So what do you do with this language? Because of course they will probably say it in their L1, in their mother tongue first, because it emerges, it just comes to them. So you can't really predict that, but you can be prepared with strategies to deal with it. So if they do say it in French or in their own language, we've got some people in Spain and Portugal, so if they say it in Portuguese or they say it in Spanish, you would say it in English. You can rephrase, excellent, Cecile, yes, you will say it in English to at least give them that input exposure to the language that they're trying to communicate. But also, when responding to that unplanned language, what you can do is you can respond immediately by rephrasing in English, or if they are trying to use English, but it's not actually very accurate, like walk crab, you will say, yes, yes, walk like a crab. Yeah. So you say the correct way of saying it. You don't just leave it there. You will say it. You don't want to overtly correct. You don't no wrong. We say walk like a crab. So you're only going to be giving them that exposure to the language. You can sometimes ask them to repeat it if it's something that you think they should be learning or should have learned already and they haven't, maybe to give them the practice of saying it. But otherwise, if it's just something that emerges, you will probably just leave it at that. Give them the correct way of saying it. Or you expand. If they say catch ball, you say yes. If you catch the ball, no points are scored. So you explain it for them. Yeah. Or you prompt it with a choice. If they can't remember the word they're trying to say, you prompt them with a choice. Don't spoon feed, don't give them the word directly because you want them to think. You can at least give them two choices. Is it your arm or your leg? Which is the word you're looking for? Okay, you help them to think. Don't just directly give them the answer. And you can also respond later. So you will notice things that are happening, you'll take notes, you'll write them down, and come back after the activity or at the end of the class, or maybe next classes with a poster with language that wasn't actually very correct and you want to look at it with them. Or maybe you plan a song that includes those words or that language or a chant, or a vocabulary from yesterday routine. So they know that every day there will be a language from yesterday routine where you will include either things that you heard or things that were really important or language that you want them to remember for today's class as well. Okay. Um, Okay, so we looked at content, we looked at communication, now we're going into cognition, and then we'll need a few minutes for culture. So cognition means thinking skills. In P, thinking means strategy, decision making, self-control, reflection, and we support this with simple tools. So this answers some of your questions. Josabel said an exit ticket at the end, and here we have an exit ticket. An example of it, if you haven't used exit tickets before, they're great. A short reflection at the end of the lesson so that students can exit the room. And these are all different examples. So you might not use all of these in one day, you might just use one. So 5 words related to football that I learned today. So they've got to write 5 words they learned about football today. Hand that in and they can go. It's an exit ticket. It's their ticket to be able to go. Draw your favorite moment of the class. So they make the drawing of their favorite moment, then they can go. Maybe you ask them to tell you what that is. How did you feel at the end of the class today? Happy, sad, excited? So maybe they just have to circle it. And it's something as simple as that. There could be a checklist with I can statements connected to the lesson, so that they can reflect upon what they have done and how they feel about it, about how well they did. Or traffic lights to show understanding quickly, but very visually. Green, I can do it. Orange, I can almost do it. Or red, I need help. So you get feedback from your students and you get them thinking about what they've learned. But a very important part of sport is the emotions, emotion management, I think. Students experience frustration and excitement and winning and losing and being chosen last and being tired and being proud, or they lose face in front of their their classmates. So it's important for them to have language to express their emotions and to help them regulate their emotions. There's an emotion thermometer. Um, about how they're feeling. And notice that we're using emojis here a lot because that's something that students tend to connect with very well. Um, and maybe teaching short phrases like I'm nervous or I'm frustrated or I need a break or it's okay. Maybe this could be a help board, an SOS board. So when they need help, when they're feeling like they need something, they can refer to that to know how to express it. They need help because they're nervous or they're frustrated, and they can find that language there. Um, and yeah, what to do when you feel angry, for example, you lost the match, and what can you do? So we're incorporating this social and emotional language within these lessons. Um, yes, Clementine says using a password, saying one word they remember to leave the class. Perfect. The password is great. Okay, so we've done content, communication, and cognition, and now it's time for culture. It's great to connect sports with wider cultural awareness, like places and people. Where is the sports played? Who plays it? How are rules different? Who are famous sports people? Where does this sport come from? Cricket or tennis or netball or baseball? And how has it evolved? And it opens space for curiosity and looking at similarities and differences and a wider knowledge of the world. So bringing a lot of different cultures into the learning space is great, whether it's a classroom, whether it's a field, and sharing sports that are played in, if students can share sports that are played in their cultures, because maybe you have children from different cultural backgrounds in your classes. So it would be really nice if they could share their own family roots or cultures, kinds of sports or games with the rest of the class, and that promotes this pluricultural value. Um, yeah. So we've got classic games in many cultures like hopscotch, marbles. You've got circle and group games with a lot of repetition of language. Duck, duck, goose is a great one because there's a lot of repetition where children sit in the circle and one goes around saying duck, 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 patting their heads. And then at one, they stop and they say goose. And when they say goose, Goose has to stand up, run around the circle, and gets chased by the one who's going duck, duck, goose. And if they sit in their spots, they're safe. Or if the other one catches them, they're the one to do duck, duck, goose. And you can change those words to whatever you want. So it could be pass, 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 catch. Or it could be football, 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 netball. So you have to really pay attention to what those words will be. But there are lots of different types of circle and Greek games that are very cultural. Rafaela, you've got an equivalent with days of the week, have you? Postman, excellent, great. Oh, tomato ketchup in France, is it? Okay, lovely. There you go. So see how many of these types of games are also shared, and that's another part of culture as well. The shared culture, not always the differences in culture. So if you need any support for your planning of your lessons, you've got, of course, lots and lots online that you can search for. Jack Hartman's channel is excellent for little children with lots of movement and actions. Um, there's a really good swimming song with all the language of different ways of swimming, for example. So he does breaststroke and snorkeling and diving, and it ends with the towel dry, which is, of course, a very fun movement to go with it. Super simple songs, Lorraine, yes. The Wiggles has a lovely bouncing ball song with football and basketball and golf ball, I think it includes. So you can, yeah, find lots of songs, traditional songs like the Hokey Pokey, moving your body. You put your left hand in, you take your left hand out, you put your left hand in, and you shake it all about, and you different parts of the body and left and right and movements. So yeah, the Hokey Pokey says, and excellent. You've got lots of storybooks. There's a list there of excellent storybooks that include sports or movement or emotions or themes like health and safety or teamwork, those skills that you're life skills that you're also introducing. And the storytelling handbook is really useful to see examples of how to exploit stories in your lessons. So you will have the PowerPoint to download afterwards, so you can get these stories and the storytelling handbook, which is excellent. Of course, you can use artificial intelligence, ChatGPT, to help you with key vocabulary, with ideas, with lesson planning, but you need to make sure that you've got your prompts really well written out and they're very clear to get what you want from artificial intelligence. So here are some examples, but of course there are other ways of doing it, but make sure that the prompts are really nice and clear and you're asking what you really want. But then once you get the answer, it's really important to adapt it to your own style and your own way of working. Yeah. So artificial intelligence is great, but as a tool to help you. Um, and I'm sure that in your classrooms you've got all kinds of learners and they need different kinds of support. And whether it's just that they're a bit shy or whether it's that they're diagnosed any special needs. So it could be a broad spectrum of different types of students that you have in your classroom, whether diagnosed or not diagnosed, just a personality trait that they might need more support with when you're asking them to move in front of others or participate in group games or be part of a team or use language out loud. Not all students always feel confident or safe or comfortable with all that. So there are certain inclusive strategies that I'm sure work very, very well with all students in a classroom, like stating the aims very clearly at the beginning of the lesson visually, make sure they know what's going to happen. There are children who are very anxious about what might happen in a lesson, and that allows them to know this is going to happen next, this is coming afterwards, and it keeps them calm if they're knowing what's going to happen. Checking aims as you go along or demonstrating tasks. If you're using English, never just say what you want. You want to accompany what you're saying with actions and demonstrations to help them understand. Some students might understand your words alone, but some students might not. And that demonstration won't harm anybody, even the ones who can understand your words. Adding visual support where possible, instruction checking questions. Instead of saying, did you all understand? And they'll all say yes. And then when they go to do it, they hadn't all understood. You ask instruction checking questions. So what are we going to do? We're going to walk or are we going to run? We're going to run. Yes. What are we going to use? We're going to use the ball. Are we going to use a hockey stick? We're going to use the ball. Okay. So you check that they understand by using ICQs, instruction checking questions. You use consistent routines and offer choice. Um, so just coming to the end of the session, this is what we have done today. We've reviewed some CLIL concept, looked at examples for the 4 Cs in a physical education class, and we considered a few techniques for providing support with planning. And I hope that has been very useful for you. And I would like to know exactly what you found most useful from today. If you would be kind enough to share in the chat, go back to the beginning in your mind and have a little think about what is it that you're taking away from today? What are you going to use? What would you like to apply in your classes? Many of you are talking about anchor charts, which is lovely to see because you can go back to the webinar from last year and there is much more info about anchor charts and how to use them and how to set them up. Word games like catching the ball, saying I play tennis, exit tickets and circle time, circle games, and ICQs. Yes, really important to check that it's understood. Different types of language, warm ups, lovely stuff. Excellent. Chance. I'm very glad that you're all taking something with you. So, just to close the session, I have a little quote. That I've taken from an American Olympic athlete who once said something about the spirit of sports. The spirit of sports gives each of us who participate an opportunity to be creative. Sports knows no sex, age, race, or religion. Sports gives us all the ability to test ourselves mentally, physically, and emotionally in a way that no other aspect of life can. For many of us who struggle with fitting in or our identity, Sports gives us our first base of confidence. That first bit of confidence can be a gateway to many other things, which could be cognitive skills, could be decision making faster, being emotionally, it's very strong, or maybe other great things like learning languages. So I think that was a very nice quote that brings together all the different aspects of what sports is. It's not just playing a sport. So thank you very much, everybody, and thanks to Pauline for her support, and thanks for Aurelie for the original concepts, and thanks to George and Celine from the British Council Paris for their trust and their support. And everyone else here, thank you so much for attending once again.
Thank you, Sarah. That was absolutely wonderful and really, really
Thank
inspiring.
you.
And it was
Thank
great
you.
because today I visited a school, as I said, and I saw some of these activities actually in practice, and they really work.
Mm.
It's really heartening
Excellent.
to see, encouraging.
Wow. That's nice. That's great. Thanks, George, for saying that because it connects, what I'm saying with the reality. Thank you. Yes.
So, a quick question for you.
Yes.
First of all, please note on the screen, everyone, that you've got the feedback form. We love to hear your feedback, so please do complete it. When you complete the feedback form, you can download the certificate of attendance. If you have any problems, just let us know. I've put the link in the chat as well a few times now, so you can scroll up. A very quick question for you. Do you create the anchor charts with the children, or do you prepare them in advance? That was a question that came up.
Okay. Yeah, I think the anchor charts is one of those ideas that many of you are interested in. So that's great. So I think the best you could do it both ways, but really the best way of making an anchor chart would be with the class. You want to make it collaborative. You want the students to feel like they were part of it as well, and not just bring something made by you, because it could be something that you've bought. It could be a commercial poster if you just bring it in and they have nothing really to connect with. So if you create it with the students as they're learning that language and you're adding to it, they feel that ownership, that they are part of that, and they can connect directly to those words that you're writing. So when you're teaching that language, you put it on there, students can connect directly. This is what my teacher's teaching. This is important. This is on the anchor chart. When I need it, it's there. Next time something comes up, you add that, and the students are involved in that moment and engaged in that moment where you are adding it to the poster so they can connect to it directly. If you're just bringing in a poster, there will be words that they'll be interested in, but maybe words that they're not because they can't really connect it to them. They're not sure when that came up. They might have lost that moment in the lesson. So it's much more useful and effective if you do it with the students, I think.
Wonderful. And
Yeah.
just one last question. There have been a few
Yes.
questions about which sports lend themselves to English and which don't. In
Mm.
particular, we had a question about swimming, one about ice
Mm.
skating. Do you think there are sports that lend themselves to CLIL in English?
That's a really interesting question. And to be honest, I don't think I've ever thought about that. So that makes it even more interesting. I don't really think it depends on the sport because I think you could teach any kind of language. I think it just depends what sport you can bring the children to. So if you're going to be playing football, then football will be easier than if you're not actually going to go swimming with them. So if it's
Mhm.
just going to be kind of theoretical in class, then it won't be as effective as if you could go swimming with the children and do the language with them while they're swimming. So I think it really depends on what possibilities you've got to offer the children. If it's swimming, then great. I'm sure there's loads of language you could do with swimming. Breaststroke, and you can teach them all the different types of swimming techniques, and yeah, and what do you wear for swimming? And so yeah, I think it doesn't really depend on the sport. I don't think.
Yeah, and I think it can be really interesting because we think about sport, but often what we're also talking about is games, isn't it?
Yeah,
Kind of
yeah.
little short, sharp activities that can be the same principles can be applied to.
Yes, absolutely. It could be games because there's movement, there's action, there's interaction, it's social. And it follows the same kind of rules in it, and there's teamwork in a game. So there's so many connections, so many things in common between a game and and a sport, isn't there? So yes.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very
Mhm.
much. Thank you to everyone. And we will see you again next week or at least Selene will see you next week with Julia Menna Dobson, who will be looking at art and music through English. So we hope you'll join them then. Thank you very
I-
much. Thank you, Sarah, and thank you, Pauline, and thank you, Aurelie. Have a lovely
I'm
evening.
I'm joining next week for sure because I love art and music, so I'll be there for sure. Thank you very much, everyone.
Wonderful.
Thank you, George. Bye bye.
Thank you. Goodbye.